In wine today, it's kind of like being in chips in the 1970s when only a few companies made chips, only Silicon Valley made chips, and everything was unknown and you're trying to get better, and Moore's Law meant every 2 years things got 4 times better. And in wine, we're about to hit that curve.
It's a big group.
Yeah, please do that.
Thank you for your tour. The woman behind Quoted Latte.
Latitude line in Burgundy across to the United States, it goes through, across to Canada, it goes through Vancouver. So it's a very northern climate, and it turns out the only grape that does well there, that even gets ripe there, is Pinot Noir. There's a function that describes how dense the roots are, and you've got a spherical thing about 0.8 meters. So when you put them 1 meter apart, then you have 1.6 meters worth of overlapping roots. And what you see in the cross section is solid, tiny roots. And like I said, I got a look that cost me a lot of money. Our yield is about 4 times less or 3 times less than a commercial vineyard. So we're looking at a crop per acre here about a factor of 10, and that tends to make, and you'll be able to validate that for yourself, an intensely concentrated wine. I'm working on improving the yield. I want to get the yield up here about to 2 tons per acre, which is still a very light yield. So I found this land. The lady owned it. She inherited it. She was on a semi-permanent vacation in some European country. 160 acres, and I sent her, I said, how'd you like $800,000 for 160 acres? And she said, deal, and I mailed the money, and I own it for $800,000. So,
Wow. And that was in
that was 2000.
2000, and it was 2008 that you started to say you wanted to.
That's right. I made wine from 96 to 2000, basically giving it to my CEO buddies in Silicon Valley. Once you get to, let me get it right, 3, 6, 8 figures, no longer a hobby. It's real. Doing a 35% vertical slope and a 25% side slope. So I went to Germany, the Mosel River. You got a river, you got a bank that looks like this, and you got a road, a farm road. And what they do in the old days, they put a tractor up there with a winch on it, and a guy'd put a belt around his waist, and he'd hook up to the winch, and it'd be just like rappelling. The tractor would be up here and let it out, and he would go down the hill like this.
One of the things that you talked about a lot in the past, but you've been a little more quiet on, is just around the politics and in that era. What's interesting is lately there's been a trend of more Silicon Valley folks getting involved in politics because of some of the policies around technology. What are your thoughts on that?
Anybody who wants to get involved in politics, more power to them. If they're free marketeers from Silicon Valley, they're probably pushing things in the right direction. The one exception, of course, being lobbying for subsidies for your company. I don't do it anymore because I found it to be not useful. I've testified in front of Congress 7 times. And what I realized after a while was the conclusions were all made, the questions were all asked, and the 2 or 3 congressmen that showed up for my testimony, I'd fly across the country, spend 2 days, would be to get a soundbite from me to justify a point, even if the point they were justifying was the exact opposite of what I was saying.
They're just looking for that thing to kind of...
When I first went to Congress, I called up, I used to have a relationship with Milton Friedman, and I called him up and I bragged about testifying in front of Congress, and he said, and I was all pumped up, and he said, it's kind of a waste of time, and I don't do it anymore. After my 7th testimony, I looked up to those guys and said, you are wasting my time, and I've never gone back, and that was like 1998 or something like that.
What do you think are some of the key ways that the wine business could really innovate? And what have you learned being now in it as well?
Well, if I were given access to all the chemicals in all the chemical stores in the world, and I had access to the 1,000 or so chemicals known to be in wine, and I could put them all in a glass, including anthocyanin, which is the chemical which colors wine red. I'd put the chemicals together and I'd give it to you, including ethanol, and you would taste it and you would say, this is not wine. So as much as we know about wine, we know almost nothing because we don't know enough even to say how to make it. So there's a huge amount of work that's got to be done to understand it. If you want to think of it from business terms, it's a multi-billion-dollar business in California.
Yes.
So it's a crop, and it's important, and a lot of people make their living on it, and the better you can do, the better off your agricultural sector is going to be. And of course, it's got all the cachet, the cool aspect of it. So I love it. I have a degree in chemistry.
Yeah.
So when I got into wine, I actually went back and I took out my organic chemistry textbook, which is that thick, and reread it. This is about 4 years ago. So I watch it, and I realize we're just starting to learn about wine. The things that are being done now at UC Davis, for example, are uncovering things that weren't known for centuries at a very high rate. So it's a very exciting time. It's kind of like, in wine today, it's kind of like being in chips in the 1970s, when only a few companies made chips, only Silicon Valley made chips, and everything was unknown and you're trying to get better, and Moore's Law meant every 2 years things got 4 times better. And in wine, we're about to hit that curve. We're about to take it from being only an artisan thing, and I'm not knocking that, but we're going to start to understand how to do a lot better job.
So let's talk about a little that the art and science, because I spend a lot of time with winemakers, with owners, and there is this idea that there's something mysterious about wine. And we're also facing this era of big data, this idea that you can measure everything, right? Being from the tech world, the CEO of Cypress, and now getting into this area that has so much lore, so much story, so much romance, where do you think that that mix or that combination of art and science is?
Art is not going to be displaced by science. On the other hand, a lack of science can harm art. A discussion I had earlier today was so-called biodynamic farming,
yes,
where there are people in the world that actually believe if you take manure, put it in a cow horn, and bury it facing north and south, the cow horn, and put it inside of an unpainted building, and then make a tea out of the manure, then you can do better farming, okay? Well, that kind of witchcraft and voodoo holds back true knowledge. So in that particular case, I can firmly believe that if manure is made into a tea, meaning manure water, and the water is sprayed on the grapes, then the bacteria that come from that will get on the grapes, and it will compete with naturally occurring bacteria in the grapes, and may even win against some harmful bacteria and make the grapes better. Okay, so I'm not saying spraying BS water on the grapes is bad, but I'd rather know why it works as opposed to treat it like some pseudo-religion. And so I believe enlightenment and science is the right way. I don't accept voodoo. And I think getting rid of some of the voodoo doesn't mean we get rid of the art. What do you want your wine to be? Do you want your wine to be something that comes out of a liquor store and gets drunk the same day? Maybe, and there's nothing wrong with that. then you have one set of goals. So you want your wine to be a wine like the Bordeaux, for example, today, that live for 50 years and become the most exquisite experiences you can think of drinking wine later. Okay, then you got a different set of goals. So I don't think science displaces art. I think science gets rid of some of the voodoo that can harm art.
You've been labeled in many publications, in many areas, different names and stuff. TJ Rodgers, what do you want to be known for?
I want to be known as a person who was smart, learned things, and was knowledgeable, and when he worked on something, he did a good job based on science and knowledge and logic. And that's, of course, it's the definition of what you have to be in semiconductors to survive.
Yes.
And then I'll take whatever credit I get for whatever my company and my winery does, and other people will say what that is, not me.